Yo, YouTube, what's up with your boy? Sports and Fitness Rants. I'm back, guys. Click that like button. Subscribe to my channel. What's up, y'all? Welcome back, guys. Welcome back, man. Got another great video for you guys today, as usual, man. And in this video, I'm going to do another episode today, guys, of Forgotten Teams, the 1994 to the 1996 Orlando Magic. That's right, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome back to another episode of Forgotten Teams. And I started doing this, I've kind of fallen off lately with the Forgotten Teams. I haven't done one probably in a couple months. But I've done, I don't know, maybe 6 or 7 videos on teams that are, like I said, forgotten, from the 80s and the 90s. Teams that people don't talk about anymore because, maybe they didn't win the championship. They weren't what you would consider a dynasty or one of the all-time great teams, let's say, because they never won. But they were a really good team. And some of these teams that I've talked about, they didn't win because of Michael Jordan and the era that they played in. Other teams that they were going against were really good. So I like to put some shine, some recognition on some of the players on these teams and the teams in general. Like I said, man, so Forgotten Teams. In this episode, we're going to be talking about the Orlando Magic from 1994 to 1996, the 3 years there that they had with Shaq and Penny. We're going to talk about in this video, guys, because they were a really good team, man, and they almost won the championship. And I want to thank you guys, man, everyone across the world, everyone across the states that's been supporting my channel. I am truly humbled, guys, for real, by all the support, man. You guys commenting, liking my videos, you guys requesting me to do videos. And I try to get, the requests, guys, and do these things. Just bear with me if I don't do your request and it takes me a week or 2 or whatever it is. I always try to take screenshots, write these things down so that I remember to go back and be like, oh, that's right, man. This guy wanted me to do this video. This person wanted me to do this. So I appreciate all that, guys. Thank you. And you guys know what to do. Turn the volume all the way up. Hit that play button. Remember, these videos are for educational purposes. And let's roll. So, yes, guys, like I said, man, we're going to do a Forgotten Teams episode, man, with the Orlando Magic 1994 to 1996, guys, all right? So the 93-94 season to the 1995-96 season. 3 years, man. It was 3 years that the Orlando Magic were on the rise, and they were one of the up-and-coming teams. And it looked like the Orlando Magic of the mid to late 90s, they looked like they were going to be the next team, man, after the Chicago Bulls. It looked like they were going to be the team. Because you remember, Michael Jordan retired, guys, in 1993-94 season, right? So that was part of, like I said, the rise of the Orlando Magic. When people thought they were going to be the next team up, Michael Jordan was gone. Shaquille O'Neal was there now in the Eastern Conference. He was going to be the big star coming in. He had all the hype, and Shaq lived up to the hype, man, coming in, man. This guy was a straight beast, man. He was a freak athlete coming into the NBA. And the Orlando Magic looked like that team that was going to take that next step. So in this video, we want to focus on those 3 years, right? 94, 95, and 96, man, and the ascension, the rise of the Orlando Magic. Now, oftentimes, you'll hear people talk about Michael Jordan's expansion era, right? They'll say, oh, Michael Jordan played an expansion era. He played in a watered-down league, blah, 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 blah. And they'll name teams like the Orlando Magic, the Miami Heat, some of these teams that came in during that time. However, once again, we focus on the Orlando Magic in this video. The Orlando Magic's first season as a franchise, guys, was the 1989-1990 season. That was their first season in existence in the NBA. So when you think about that, then you think about the Orlando Magic making it to the NBA Finals in the 1995 season. I mean, my goodness, talk about a rise. Your franchise's first season is 1990, and 5 years later, you're in the NBA Finals with a chance to win the title. That's an amazing turnaround, man. So once again, this exposes this idea that because teams were added, that made the NBA garbage. The Orlando Magic win the NBA Finals in 1995, man. So once again, guys, don't believe the hype about this expansion. And remember, the entire NBA's history is expansion. They were expanding and adding teams in the 60s and the 70s, in the 80s. So once again, they try to make it seem like it was just Michael Jordan's 90s that they added teams to, guys. Wasn't the case. The league was not watered down or any of those things. So, and when we think about the Orlando Magic, guys, of those 3 seasons, the Orlando Magic had a core group of players, right? A core group of players from 1994. So like I mentioned earlier, Shaquille O'Neal was drafted in the 1993 draft, 92 draft. So the 92-93 season was his first season, Shaquille O'Neal. And immediately Shaquille O'Neal had an impact. I believe the Orlando Magic won 21 games the season before he got there. He bumped that all the way up to 41 games when Shaquille O'Neal got there. So Shaq, like I said, Shaq had an immediate impact on winning, on the game. Like I said, Shaq was really good on both sides of the ball, man. I tell you guys on this channel, to me, Shaquille O'Neal's physical athletic peak was Orlando. This guy could run the break. He could hustle on defense. He could recover, block shots. He was a better rebounder in Orlando. So to me, that was really prime physical Shaq on both sides. Like I said, man, the running of the floor, the condition that he was in. This guy was 300 pounds, man, and could run the floor. We had never seen anything like Shaquille O'Neal when he came into the NBA. Like I said, his charisma, the personality of Shaquille O'Neal. And like I said, he was box office, man, and he came in. He was supposed to be that next star coming in. And like I said, immediate impact. The Orlando Magic won 41 games. I believe they were 41-41 in the 1992-93 season. They did not make the playoffs, though, that season. And then we all know they would bring in Anthony Hardaway the next season. So when you think about the Orlando Magic, guys, part of the reason why they had this rise from 94, 95, and 96 was because of the draft picks. Now, it wasn't just Shaquille O'Neal and Anthony Hardaway. In 1990, the first season of the Orlando Magic's franchise, they drafted Nick Anderson. Nick Anderson, you guys remember Nick Anderson? He was the guy that said 45 is not 23 during the 1995 playoffs. Nick Anderson was the guy who stole the ball from Michael Jordan in 1995. You guys all remember that play. That was Nick Anderson, man. He was a very scrappy, athletic wing, 6'6", about 205, 210. Like I said, just very gritty. He was a slasher. Like I said, just an athletic wing, man. He gave the effort, man. He would give you about 15, 16 points a game, maybe 4 or 5 rebounds, maybe a couple of assists. But he was known as a slasher, like I said, a hustle guy, a guy that would give the effort on the defensive end, man. And like I said, he was a really solid player, Nick Anderson, man, that shooting guard position, man. You know what I'm saying? He wasn't part of the, the top tier of shooting guards in the 90s. He was like that next tier or the tier right below those next guys. That was where I would have put Nick Anderson. So they drafted him in 1990, and he would be one of their core players, Nick Anderson, man, right? And then in 1991, the very next season, the Orlando Magic would draft Dennis Scott, 3D. You guys have probably seen him. He does broadcasting now. I believe he works for NBA TV, I want to say. But 3D Dennis Scott, they drafted him in 1991. So now you start to see the Orlando Magic start to, like I said, draft some of their core players. These are 2 of their core 4, I call it, for the Orlando Magic in their rise, right? So we all know about Shaquille O'Neal and Anthony Hardaway, but the other 2 members of their core 4 was Nick Anderson and Dennis Scott. These 4 players would be on the Orlando Magic during those 3 years that the Orlando Magic looked like they were going to make that run. They were going to be that next team. And Dennis Scott, guys, he might be one of the first high-volume three-point shooters in NBA's history, guys. He was about 6'8", about 215, 220 pounds. He was a thick dude. Dennis Scott, like I said, he played the small shooting guard, small forward position, mostly a small forward, Dennis Scott. But like I said, he was probably one of the first high-volume three-point shooters in NBA's history, guys. He utilized that three-point shot, 3D. That's what he was known for, man. Shooting the three-pointer and playing some defense, man. He was one of the first 3 and D guys in the NBA. And like I said, probably one of the first high-volume three-point shooters in the NBA's history, guys. He really utilized that three-point line, man. And the Orlando Magic started to make some moves, right? You hitting on Nick Anderson. Then you draft a Dennis Scott. And then in the very next season, a couple of seasons later, you draft Shaquille O'Neal. No, wait, was it that season? It might have been the next season. You draft Shaquille O'Neal. So you have Nick Anderson, Dennis Scott, you draft Shaquille O'Neal, right? The Orlando Magic automatically improved. They get 41 wins, man. And then the next season, right, the 1993-1994 season is when the Orlando Magic would start to, like I said, to ascend. You bring in an Anthony Hardaway, man. In 1994, man, right, their number 1 draft pick. And we all know about Penny Hardaway, man. If the injuries did not derail his career, this man was sensational, man. He would have went down as one of the all-time great point guards, probably a top 5 point guard of all time, Anthony Hardaway, with the skill set he had at that height, 6'7". Like I said, the silky, smooth way that he moved on the court. Anthony Hardaway, everything looked effortless for Anthony Hardaway out there. The handle, like I said, the offensive game, the playmaking skills of Anthony Hardaway. My only knock on Anthony Hardaway would have been his defensive prowess. But once again, these are things that he could have developed into if he didn't have a lot of these injuries that kind of derailed him down the road. So now you have the core four for the Orlando Magic, and the Orlando Magic that next season would win 50 games, I believe, in the 1994 season, right? Their first 50-win season in the franchise's history. And once again, they just came in 1990, and already they've won 50 games in their fourth season, guys, hitting on draft picks. Anthony Hardaway, Shaquille O'Neal, Nick Anderson, Dennis Scott. They would have guys, complimentary players around these guys. I believe Scott Skiles was there for a couple of seasons. I believe he was there in 1994. So you had Anthony Hardaway learning from a hard-nosed, scrappy, gritty Scott Skiles, who still to this day has the record for most assists in an NBA game with 30. Scott Skiles, you probably never even heard of him. If you grew up in the 80s and 90s, you know who Scott Skiles is. Once again, on that lower tier, not the top tier point guard or the next guys. He's right under those next guys. Scott Skiles, man. Never going to make really an all-star caliber player, but a really solid starting point guard in the NBA, man, or a really solid backup point guard for your team. And they had Scott Skiles and Anthony Hardaway playing together some of those games. I believe Scott Skiles started 40, 45 of those games that season with Anthony Hardaway. And Anthony Hardaway, I'm sure, learned some, tricks in some from Scott Skiles. But they would fill the roster around these guys. You bring in a Donald Royal, you bring in a Anthony Bowie, some of these bodies, 6'6", 6'7" wing guys that could play defense. They bring in a Brian Shaw. You bring in some of these guys, man, like I said, that could play defense, that can knock down jump shots, that could be those hustle guys, right? The guys that do the other things out there around the main four players, Nick Anderson, Dennis Scott, Anthony Hardaway, and Shaquille O'Neal. So like I said, in 1994, they would win 50 games that season, and I believe they would get bounced out in the first round by the Indiana Pacers that would eventually go to the Eastern Conference Finals in 1994. They would lose to the New York Knicks. But the Orlando Magic, that would be their first playoff appearance, the first playoff appearance for Shaquille O'Neal, Penny Hardaway, Nick Anderson, Dennis Scott, these guys. And like I said, they would get swept, I believe it was 3-0 by Reggie Miller's Pacers. And Reggie Miller was sensational in that series, man. I believe he averaged like 30 points a game in that series, man. He was just going off against the Orlando Magic. One of the big problems for the Orlando Magic during that 3-year run that they, had that ascend was that they were never really a really good defensive team. They were a really good offensive team. I believe every year that I'm talking about, 94, 95, and 96, I believe they were either top 5 or top 10 in offensive efficiency, offensive rating. The problem was their defense. They were never in the top 10 in defense. I believe the highest they ever got in those 3 years was number 12 in defense rating. Now, that's not bad, but it's not great, right? It's not like championship level defense. I never really thought of the Orlando Magic as a really tough, hard-nosed defensive team. Were they a really good team? Yes, they really were because of their offensive skills, the skill set of guys like Shaquille O'Neal, Anthony Hardaway, the shooting of a Dennis Scott. I mean, they had almost all the areas covered. When you talk about a big body down low, a dominant post presence with Shaquille O'Neal, you talk about the point guard position, a true floor general with Anthony Hardaway. You talk about a scrappy wing, an athletic wing, a slasher, a guy that could play defense, right? Hustle, a Nick Anderson. And you have a guy that can spread the floor, and Dennis Scott, right, will play defense, a big body and a guy, 6'8", that can shoot that three. You had a lot of good players on that team that could do different things. Like I said, the skills on the offensive end. Their problem to me was just the defense. If they could have maybe turned themselves into a top 5 defense, they might have been able to make more noise in 1994 and in 1995. So that was the first year that the core four would be together. That was Anthony Hardaway's rookie season, man. They went to the playoffs. They won 50 games. Like I said, the first 50-win season in the franchise history. And they would follow that up with one of the greatest seasons of their franchise's history, of 57 wins in that 1995 season. Remember, they would bring in a Horace Grant from the Chicago Bulls. We all know about that move. If you're a Michael Jordan fan, you're a Bulls fan in the 90s, you remember Horace Grant going to Orlando Magic. That was like a slap in the face to the Bulls. And that would prove to be a big piece for the Orlando Magic, bringing in a veteran presence like Horace Grant, who is known for being a very tough, hard-nosed defensive player down low in the post, a solid rebounder at that power forward position, and a guy that can knock down, the jump shot anywhere from 12 to 15 feet. Horace Grant had a nice jumper, man, on that perimeter in that mid-range. So that was a key piece for them to bring in, and immediately had an impact. Like I said, with the other core four still remaining there, like I said, you're bringing in guys like Brian Shaw, who is a quality defensive player, a big body, 6'6", right? Scrappy. You bring in, like I said, a Donald Royal you have on that team. You have an Anthony Bowie on that team. These are all scrappy guys that are going to do the other things for the main guys. And you had a Brian Hill, now his second year coaching the Orlando Magic. Brian Hill was the was the assistant coach of the Orlando Magic. I believe the first couple of years that the franchise came about, I believe Matt Guokas was the head coach for those first couple of seasons. He was the head coach for Shaquille O'Neal his rookie year. And then that next season, 94, they brought in a Brian Hill off the bench. He was the assistant, made him the head coach. And he was a decent coach, Brian Hill. Not a great coach or a good coach or a bad coach. He was a decent head coach, like I said, for the Orlando Magic. And like I said, they won 57 games in 1995. And we all know they would face off against the Chicago Bulls in the second round, right? Their first year making it to the second round, and they would face the 1995 Chicago Bulls. Michael Jordan just came back from playing basketball, right? Horace Grant trades teams, and now he's playing against his old team. And we all know that series would play out. I mentioned it earlier. Nick Anderson saying that 45 wasn't 23, stole the ball from Michael Jordan. Right, we all know about that series, right? That was the last playoff series for Michael Jordan, the Chicago Bulls, or a Michael Jordan-led Bulls team that they would lose. And the Orlando Magic would go into the Eastern Conference Finals, and they would make the NBA Finals. They would go all the way to the NBA Finals. The Orlando Magic, guys, all the way to the NBA Finals, right? I mean, it was just a remarkable turnaround. In Shaquille O'Neal's third NBA season, they would go to the finals. Anthony Hardaway's second NBA season. Like I said, they got the core four still there. You bring in a Horace Grant, like I said, a champion who's won before, the veteran presence, the savvy of a Horace Grant. And now all of a sudden, the Orlando Magic are the team in the East now. Now they're the team to beat in the East. Like I said, in just Anthony Hardaway's second season, Shaquille O'Neal's third season, they're in the NBA Finals matched up against the great Hakeem Olajuwon and the Houston Rockets, who are going for their back-to-back titles. Now, in the NBA Finals, Shaquille O'Neal and the Orlando Magic, they would be outclassed by Hakeem Olajuwon and the Rockets. The Rockets just proved to be too savvy for them, right? They had a lot of veterans on that team. You had Clyde Drexler on that team, man. You had Robert Horry on that team. Like I said, you had the great Hakeem Olajuwon. You just had a lot of really solid players on that team. And it just turned out to be too much for the young Orlando Magic. And they were swept 4-0. Shaquille O'Neal was pretty good. Anthony Hardaway they were okay in that series. But once again, the problem for me was the defense. Orlando Magic did not have the defense. Shaquille O'Neal was not the defensive player of Hakeem Olajuwon. Some of the guys that the Rockets had on their team, like I said, Clyde Drexler, Vernon Maxwell, some of these other guys, they were known for defense. They were hustle guys on the defensive end. The Orlando Magic didn't really have any of those great defensive players like Hakeem Olajuwon. Shaquille O'Neal was good on defense, but he wasn't Hakeem Olajuwon great. Right? He wasn't on that level. And once again, they were young. These guys were still young. Anthony Hardaway's second season. Shaquille O'Neal's third season. Some of these guys, like I said, they just were not prepared. Even with Horace Grant being there, even with guys like Nick Anderson, Dennis Scott, right, and these other players on that team, the Brian Shaws, they just were not a match for the Houston Rockets. And they beat the Orlando Magic 4-0. But as NBA fans, a lot of us really believed that the Orlando Magic, they were going to be the team to beat. Yes, Michael Jordan was back, but we didn't know what Michael Jordan was going to be able to do, where he was going to be able to take his game. Was he going to be able to get back to where he was? A lot of people weren't sure about Michael Jordan. They were doubting Michael Jordan. This is why the 1996 season for Michael Jordan was the reckoning. I've told you, people had to come to the reckoning because everyone was doubting Michael Jordan. They said they're never going to get back to the top again. Now it's time for Shaquille O'Neal, the Orlando Magic. They were going to be the team in the Eastern Conference. That was only the first NBA Finals of many to come for the Orlando Magic. That's the way it seemed, guys. That was the 1995 season for the Orlando Magic. They were really good that year, man. Really, really good. But then they took it to another level. And they came back the next season, 1995-96, and were even that much better. They won 60 games. Still to this day, that's the most wins in Orlando Magic franchise history, guys. The 1995-96 Orlando Magic, 60 wins and 22 losses. I believe Dwight Howard's Orlando Magic in 2009 and 10 won 59 games. They didn't win 60. So still to this day, the 60 wins, 96 Orlando Magic, still the most wins in the franchise's history, guys. 60 wins. Still wasn't the best record in the Eastern Conference, though. Why is that? Because the Chicago Bulls in 96 won 72 games. 72 games. So even though the Orlando Magic were outstanding in 1996, right? This is the third year now in a row that they make the playoffs. Their third 50-plus wins season. 3 seasons in a row, 50 or more wins. 60 wins, most in the franchise history, still to this day. But once again, the Orlando Magic were never a top 5 defense. They were, I believe, number 3 in offense this season in 96. Like I said, they were really good on the offensive end. They had guys that could do all kinds of things. But it was a defensive end to me that held back the Orlando Magic. Shaquille O'Neal was never really a stout, all-time great defensive player. He was really good in Orlando, and he was good in those early years in L.A., but he was never great on defense, never great. And that, I believe, inhibited the Magic from really taking that next step. And we all know what happened in 1996. They would face against Michael Jordan, the Bulls, the 72-win Bulls, and the Bulls would sweep them right out of there in 4 games. And a couple of the games were close, but for the most part, the Bulls dismantled the Orlando Magic. Now, sometimes you'll hear people say Horace Grant was a little banged up. I believe he missed one of the games. No doubt about it. It wouldn't have made a difference. It would not have made a difference because the difference between 95 and 96 was the mentality of Michael Jordan and really the condition of Michael Jordan, the physical condition of him, the stamina, all those things. That was a big difference. And like I said, the Bulls also brought in Dennis Rodman in 1996, and that was a huge boost to the Chicago Bulls. You bring in one of the all-time great defensive players and one of the great rebounders in NBA's history onto a team that already had 2 of the all-time great defensive players in Scottie Pippen and Michael Jordan, and the greatest player in NBA's history, Michael Jordan. So that season for the Orlando Magic was the end. That was the end of the Orlando Magic as we knew them. Shaq and Penny as we knew them. Shaquille O'Neal would leave and go to the Los Angeles Lakers that next season, right? Basically running away from Michael Jordan. And he has stated that before in many occasions that he left the Eastern Conference. He wanted to get away from Michael Jordan, and he didn't think that he could beat Michael Jordan. So he went to the West Coast, and maybe it was for the money. Maybe it's for L.A. L.A. is a bigger market than Orlando, and you see what Shaquille O'Neal parlayed that L.A. Lakers time into movies, music, right? Commercials, all the things that Shaquille O'Neal is known for now, the endorsements, right? His business savvy was all due to his time in L.A., his charisma, his personality. So there's no knock on Shaq for leaving the Orlando Magic, but it makes us wonder what could have been, right? What could have been if Shaquille O'Neal stayed in Orlando, if Anthony Hardaway never got hurt them years later, if they stayed together, Shaq and Penny, they kept that team, those 2 guys, the main stars. It really makes you wonder what could have been. What could have happened if Michael Jordan didn't come back from baseball? Would the Orlando Magic have won in 1996? It would have been an interesting matchup. The Orlando Magic versus the Seattle Supersonics. Because you're talking about one of the great defensive teams, the Seattle Supersonics, going against Shaquille O'Neal's Orlando Magic, one of the really good offensive teams with one of the great centers. Who would have guarded Shaquille O'Neal on the Sonics? Frank Bukowski, Irvin Johnson, right? Sean Kemp. They would have to throw a bunch of bodies at Shaq, man. It would have been interesting to see the matchup of a Gary Payton versus Anthony Hardaway, right? The height and size of an Anthony Hardaway, the low center of gravity, the grit, the trash talk of a Gary Payton going against each other. That would have been a very interesting matchup. And then you have a Nick Anderson versus a Hershey Hawkins and Nate McMillan and a Dennis Scott and some of the other complimentary players. Detlef Schrempf versus a Horace Grant. It would have been an interesting matchup to me. And maybe the Orlando Magic could have won. Like I said, who knows? Maybe the Orlando Magic win back-to-back titles, 96, 97. You never know what happens. Maybe they bring in a guy, they draft somebody. You never know, guys. So for me, the 1994 to 1996 Orlando Magic, they're a forgotten team because they didn't win anything, right? They got swept 4 games to nothing by the Rockets. So a lot of people, knock Shaq for that. And, they don't really give the Orlando Magic any credit because of the way they got beat in the finals. But once again, in 1994, they went to 50 wins for the first time in franchise history. Then in 95, they went to 57 wins. Then they went to 60 wins. And like I said, then after that, Shaquille O'Neal left, and we never really got to see what the Orlando Magic could have been if they would have kept Anthony Hardaway, Shaquille O'Neal, Nick Anderson, Dennis Scott, Horace Grant for a couple more seasons. And these guys played with each other for a couple more years. So for me, they're a forgotten team, man. They were a really good team. Like I said, for those couple of years, 94, 95, 96, the Orlando Magic, man, they were a formidable team, which is why, like I said, they were in the NBA Finals in 1995. And then 1996, they were in the Eastern Conference Finals, man. Like I said, only in Shaq's third season in the NBA Finals. Penny Hardaway's second season, they're in the NBA Finals, guys. So I hope you guys appreciate this video, man. Once again, the Orlando Magic, 1994 to 1996, a forgotten team because they never won anything, but they were really good for a couple of years there, man. Like I said, they had some really good role players on that team, and we all know about Shaq and Penny, man. One of the great duos that could have been, right? You guys know the deal, man. I'll catch you guys on the next one.